We finally heard from the man himself, Sherrone Moore, about how fall camp is going, and there were a lot to take away. However, there's only 3 things that I want to talk about today, essentially. I'll tangent, you know that. But nonetheless, lots of big things to take away from Michigan fall camp. Why, again, I continue to fall a little bit for fall camp hype. We're going to talk about it on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And I was on the ground yesterday in Oosterbaan after having a very filling meal over at the Big House. Sampling all of the food options, which are new. Highly, highly recommend, man. If you go to a game, you're going to want these. Nonetheless, Sherrone Moore talked about the team, obviously asked about where the team stands. I came away very bolstered and more confident than I was beforehand. And it kind of stems from the first thing, which we are going to listen to right now.
Number one, the way they walk in the building, the way they carry themselves, the way they take care of the new locker room, which is beautiful. But we've got an undefeated record. We keep track of everything, keeping track of how the locker room is. And it's been awesome, keeping track of the building and everything we do. So that's been great. And just watching our guys in practice. And when you have the vision of the head coach and you stand behind and you see everything going on, you watch the quarterback, you watch the line, you watch the D-line, you watch the defense's eyes, you hear the communication that the defense does, and you hear the pads go, like, you're like, oh yeah, we're going to be good. Like, you can feel it, you can sense it. We don't really care about what other people think. We're just ready to go. So the guys working their tails off and excited.
All right, so obviously that's a little Brady Hoke in there in the sense of you can hear the football. You can hear the football going, and that's good news, right? But what this tells me is a lot about the attention to detail, right? Obviously, that is something that you hope for, but at the same time, this is kind of where Michigan turned itself around, was because of guys like Aiden Hutchinson, who came in his senior year and said, listen, we're not doing a lot of these things. Like, this is a big part of the culture. And I remember hearing stories around that time, and it didn't really register that much of, this is how we treat the locker room. This is where we put our shoes. This is how far apart we put them. This is how they face. This is where we put this, and this is where we put that. The fact that they're still keeping track of these things, the culture is, I think, in a great place. But then on top of it, yeah, you're hearing football. That's a pretty big thing. Like, I don't think that this was necessarily like, I didn't write off of this minute here. I don't know that many people are going to be writing off of it, because I don't necessarily think that on its face you look at that and people are going to, oh, I better go read this article. But yes, he does say we're going to be good after he pounds his fist a few times. And again, those are the types of things that don't have to be proffered. Those are the types of things that usually in fall camp, especially in first-time head coach, you could absolutely just be, well, we're still working things out. We got a couple weeks to go. Like the direction this team is heading. But, once we get some of these like it's actually what we're hearing about the quarterback battle, right? Is like, oh, they're all, but they're saying they're all playing at a high level. That's one thing, but it's one thing to kind of be like, we still got some time. We're going to work things out. He's not saying that. He's saying this team is going to be good based off of the attention to detail, just to kind of disambiguate there, and what he's seeing and hearing on the practice field. Now, a lot of people aren't necessarily going to buy that Michigan is in this incredible place, of course, given all of the personnel losses, but we walked you through earlier in the week with all the snap counts and different things. And I think one of the interesting things coming out of fall camp is the discussion of the offense being so prevalent. And I think that this kind of plays into it, as I think that they found that they've got complementary football. Now, coming out of this press conference, it does not seem like there is any obvious quarterback, at least not that they are disclosing. It sounds like it is neck and neck with kind of a couple different guys, 3 different guys. He did say, when asked about Tuttle, he's like, yeah, he's been available, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's been full strength. But when it comes to that battle, I expect it to be more of a Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle, Davis Warren scenario. I don't know that it's going to be settled in week 1. But it sounds like the offensive line is coming together. Later, you're going to hear about, in segment 2, we're going to talk about the couple players that are standing out so far in his eyes. One of them is an offensive lineman who's been around for a little while, which is, I think, interesting to kind of get into. I think when you have this confluence, because people say, well, they had all these 4th, 5th, and 6th years. And he kind of addresses that too. He's like, well, we had all these 4th, 5th, and 6th years. I think that that's one thing, but when you've had guys behind them, that's something that's being discounted quite a bit because they got to see how those guys operated. And one of the things that he said that he's kind of told these guys is, and he'll mention this in the next clip. I don't have the verbiage correct, I don't think, but it's something like observe and emulate and surpass. I think that that's a very bona fide way to go about things in a lot of ways. I know that is for me. I learn most by watching other people do things. How did I get into this position in my life and in my work? Well, part of it was in 2015, my first year covering the team. I didn't ask very many questions at all. I sat and watched how everyone else operated. I went and saw how their podcasts were doing. I went and saw what kind of things that they were writing coming out of press conferences. I observed, and then I emulated it. I don't know that I've surpassed them, but that was the method that I took. So you have to keep in mind that the majority of these guys have had that opportunity. And certainly this team has been supplemented with people who have been outside the building, who have had to learn the customs and the ways of the Wolverines. But I am encouraged by what Sherrone Moore had to say because I feel like that is kind of gearing up to this team is going to end up being better than people think. Now, ESPN has their matchup predictors out for game by game now. You can check out that on Wolverines Wire. We might talk about that tomorrow, but we'll touch on it here briefly. Michigan has over 60% chances to win 9 games, according to ESPN, and are 35%, I think, maybe 36% and below for 3 others, Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State. I still think Michigan will get 1, if not 2 of those. Because if they are sticking to the blueprint and the culture is still intact and guys have been able to observe, emulate, and surpass, then Michigan's in a lot better shape than you think. So anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the 2 players who have had the best fall camp or surprised the most in fall camp so far. We will get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, it's obviously summer dwindling down. Football is coming in a matter of weeks, 2.5 weeks for the big show, week 0 coming up soon. But there's no better time to get to the ballpark, get outside, got to do it, than Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which gets getting tickets easier and faster. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. I wish flights were like that as I look for flights to Seattle. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and your lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying baseball tickets. One of the best parts about it, aside from the seat views, is the zone deals. You can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. And with their lowest price guarantee, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, if you're watching, I can't make eye contact with the camera for a second. You got to move this audio. Sherrone Moore talked about, see, now it's doing it anyway. Sherrone Moore talked, I asked him what players have had the best or improved the most in fall camp, and he mentioned 2, and I think it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say. There are 2 players. Well, one of them we've talked about a lot, one we've talked to. We've talked to both, actually. So here's what he had to say, the 2 players.
The list is huge. There's a guy at every position that's really taken the next step. I think the guy that really has been where he was in the spring and taken the next step in fall camp is TJ Guy. He's a guy that's really taken that next step. You got Derek, and you got him, and you got other guys that are chomping at the bit, but he's really taken that step to be an elite player and be that guy. There's not that much of a drop-off like last year, so I feel really good about TJ, and he's changed his body. He's done a lot of great things, and at every position you can go down the line, and we'll talk about other positions, but another guy that just jumps out is a guy that has started games for us is Gio El-Hadi. I mean, he's changed his body, and then I think being behind Keegan and Zinner the past couple years, he's really done a really good job of learning. You know, we always say watch, emulate, surpass, and that's what he's trying to do. So those guys have all, the whole team's been outstanding, but those 2 I could think specifically, and ironically, they're really, really close. I think they were roommates, so good to see.
Watch, emulate, surpass, not observe. Synonyms, so close. I like my word better. I like observe. Nonetheless, I think that bodes really well. If those are 2 of the guys who have taken the biggest steps forward, improved the most, impressed the most, surprised the most in fall camp. Because you need that offensive line to come together. Giovanni El-Hadi has been a guy who's been waiting his turn for a long time. He has certainly been in a watch, emulate, surpass mode, having been behind Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinter at the position. So and he's obviously, like he said, like Moore said, started games when Keegan was out, more so 2022. And otherwise has kind of had to bide his time. As he said earlier in the week, he had opportunities to go elsewhere and chose to stay. Want to know more about these nebulous opportunities? Like, tell us what schools are tampering with you. Anyhow, the fact that he's one of the best players, because they need that offensive line to be bruising. Now, here's the only thing about the offensive line. You're only as good as all 5 there are, right? You have any weak links, it's going to go south one way or another. That's why, it can change an entire game plan. Like Carson Barnhart was very good, very, very good. Doesn't get the credit for being very good, though, because he had some deficiencies when it came to going up against top pass rushers in some games, right? Obviously, Penn State, they had to run the ball because they couldn't keep McCarthy healthy. So if you have a turnstile, and he wasn't a turnstile, but I'm just saying, if you have a turnstile at right tackle, then guess what? Your offensive line's not that good. Maybe the other 4 might be great, but if you've got one weakness, then that unfortunately means that you have weakness in your offensive line. So looking at Gio, it doesn't necessarily mean that hey, this is going to be a good line, but it bodes well when guys who have had to be behind those 4th, 5th year types were able to do, as Sherrone Moore said, watch, observe, and emulate. Watch, emulate, and surpass, rather. So I think that definitely helps to have someone at that position, someone who's been around, that suddenly you're looking at him and you're saying, whoa, that he's really good. That's what you hope for. You want that next man up to be in that spot. Now, TJ Guy is not a starter. Obviously, that distinction goes to Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. But considering that we've been hearing his name constantly since April, or I guess even March when spring ball started, I think that is a good thing that the trajectory continues to climb. Because they absolutely need depth there. And even though he mentioned Cam Brandt at one point, it's outside of Josiah, Derek, and TJ, I don't think that there is an obvious answer at who that next edge rusher is going to be in the rotation. So at this juncture, if TJ Guy is in fact what he says he is, then it means you at least have 3. And considering the depth in the interior, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Rayshon Benny, and Sherrone Moore confirmed that Eno Etta and Trey Pierce are doing incredible jobs there. I think that you might be able to get away a little bit more with only having 3 for sure guys. I mean, there will be a rotation, right? It's not just going to be like, all right, one of you is out, the other of you is going to play the entire game. But it does allow, even so, for them to play with different matchups. TJ Guy coming in for Josiah, TJ Guy coming in for Derek. That can certainly be a 3-man rotation, but I expect Cameron Brandt or Keyshawn Bennett to be one of those types that starts to also cycle in. But I think that considering he was a 3-star, everyone looked at him at the time of his commitment. You know, Don Brown was still, I believe, the defensive coordinator, and everyone's like, oh, 3-star from Massachusetts, not a lot of offers. Boston College being one of them, I believe. It's Don Brown special. Sometimes those Don Brown specials have worked out, right? Kwity Paye was one of them. Now, obviously, TJ Guy is not Kwity Paye. He is going into his senior year as a reserve. Kwity Paye did not do that, of course. So I think that there's a lot to like, though, about a guy that has been talked about a ton, that is likely to be a very productive player on this team, to get that opportunity and run with it the way that he has. Obviously, he's learned behind a lot of other great guys, but at the same time, I think the most important time for him in his observe, emulate, and surpass period was probably 2021, when he was behind Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. And he got to play a little bit that year. Like he got a sack against Talia Tagovailoa. So I think that bodes really well to have a guy like him starting to make waves this year, because they need him. That's, I think, the biggest part of all of this. The guys they need are the ones that are stepping up. The guys who have been around and watched the others are the ones that are being talked about as they are the ones who are improving the most. They have taken the biggest leaps. Could be time on task. It could be the fact that, hey, they're actually out there with the ones and the twos and doing things that we need, that they weren't able to do as much when they were in with the 2s, the 3s, the scout team, all that kind of stuff. So I like where Michigan's at with the fact that those 2 guys, and obviously Sherrone said a lot more than what we can list here, and they named those 2 guys, but I would be curious to hear who are some of those others who have taken the big step forward. But with that in mind, there are freshmen that are standing out. He listed 5 specifically, technically 7. I've been going with 5, but technically 7 because he just named a position group. So let's hear from Sherrone as to the freshmen. I didn't ask this question for once. Normally, I'm the guy that asks this question. Thankfully, in the past, when I didn't ask the question, those were the years that Jim Harbaugh would be like, I'm not answering that. I don't know if it's because I didn't ask it. Wanted to be like, that's Isaiah's question. Nonetheless, let's hear about what he had to say about the freshmen. We're going to do that here in just a moment. All right, I feel almost discombobulated making this I know that some of you have wanted to have more shows where we have interview footage and things of that nature. I did this in a little bit of a different way where I'm actually listening along instead of just going off of memory, because if I go off of memory and then insert it after the fact, it's a little bit less of me just like reacting and more of me kind of expositing in a way. Maybe not expositing, I don't know. All right, so Sherrone got asked about the freshmen and which freshmen have stood out. I didn't take this because I saw some people on my Instagram that were like, wait, so this guy's going to be a starter? And I'm like, no. That's not what he's saying. He's just saying that these are the ones who look the best so far, could be instant impact. On the other end, we'll discuss the one player I think it became evident we're going to see, which I think I don't know. I have a couple different ideas. Oops. Well, I guess we see. This is the problem with the way I started this. I have some different ideas as to what it might mean. So let's hear what Sherrone Moore had to say about the freshman right now.
There's a couple of them. I mean, starting quarterback position, Jaden Davis. He has the it factor, makes plays, competitive. Obviously was a 3-time state champion, player of the year, poise, has ability. We'll see how it progresses. His teammate, Channing Goodwin, he's a playmaker. He's a dude that's going to probably help us this year in some way, shape, or form. The tight ends have been awesome. Jordan Marshall is probably the next guy. He's got a chance to be special, dynamic. Yeah, we'll see. Ben Hall is, having guys like Jordan Marshall in the room will make you play fast and physical, and Ben Hall has played all of 230 pounds he is, so he's run physical fast, so super excited where he, how he's hitting and how he's gaining momentum. And then on the defensive side, Dominic Nichols is probably the guy that jumps out the most as a freshman. That's really, because he's been here in the spring, and he came here, and he's been in the fall, so he's a guy that I think as a freshman's got a chance. And then probably one more guy is Cole Sullivan.
All right, so little point of demarcation. Again, I don't think I'm using that right, but nonetheless. It works in my head, okay? Is that flip where he says, yeah, we'll see about Jordan Marshall and goes on in about Ben Hall. That was because there was a quick interjection there, which I omitted for the sake of time, where he said, could he be that third running back? So with that in mind, considering what he had to say about Ben Hall, I would say, well, you're going to see Jordan Marshall this year, but I don't think he's going to be Chris Evans necessarily unless he comes into a game, gets his first opportunity. Like, maybe they give him an early carry and he houses it, and then they do the same against Texas and it's the same, then maybe that changes the calculus a little bit. Jaden Davis. No, I don't think Jaden Davis is going to win the starting job. I like what he had to say about Jaden Davis because that kind of makes it sound like, all right, this could be rolling in a good direction. But obviously you've got guys who have been around for a couple of years, know the system better, and also have playmaking ability. Now, if Jaden Davis became a starter next year, you're not going to get any complaints from me unless one or more of the Michigan quarterbacks have an incredible year this year in return, and it just seems like, why would you? But you're not going to get any complaints from me about that. But no, I don't think he's necessarily going to play. I should have added Dominic Nichols and Cole Sullivan. Well, less Cole Sullivan because we weren't talking about linebackers. I've already told you I think he's going to play and he's going to have a big year in year one. But with Dominic Nichols, I think he could have been added to that list of the rotation. Like I mentioned, Cam Brandt along with TJ Guy. I think Dominic Nichols is going to be in that rotation. I think we're definitely going to see him. But I think in the tight ends, I don't think we are going to necessarily see much of, if at all, this year. So that leaves one candidate out of everyone that just mentioned as to my guy I think we're going to see early often, and that's Channing Goodwin. Now, why did I say kind of going in that it might be a mixed bag? Well, because if the freshman wide receiver is a guy that kind of depends on how Sherrone's looking at it. Is Channing Goodwin, is he out there wowing because he's making the same types of plays that the wide receivers are making that are already on the team? Or is he being evaluated from this is what he was in high school and this is how much better he is now? Because there is a distinction. Because if Channing Goodwin is doing the former, then there's a chance that the wide receivers aren't as good as we've kind of talked about that group potentially being throughout the last couple weeks. And that would pose a potential problem. But then again, I think it's probably more the latter. That, yeah, he's taken big strides. We can use him this year. And I think that would be an interesting development as well. I've always said and then I've gone back on it, but I revert back to it. Wide receivers are even though Sherrone had this thing, the further away you are from the ball, as you talked about Goodwin, I do find that to be true when it comes to linemen generally. But at the same time, wide receivers feel like they are the most likely to be productive in year 2. And if they see the field in year 1, it's just kind of like a catch here and a catch there. We saw that last year for the most part. Samaj had a really good year, like 300 yards or something like that, 200 yards, couple really nice touchdowns. The end around as well. Obviously, the punt return against Iowa was really nice. But generally, you don't see a guy come in and take over like how Tariq Black started to in 2017. And Donovan Peoples-Jones was okay, I think, in his freshman year. But generally, you don't see that often. It happens, but it's a little bit rarer. I think that a lot of times where we see I can't wait to see what that receiver does. I think Roman Wilson had the first catch in 2020, and then we didn't really see or hear from Roman Wilson for the rest of the year. And Cornelius Johnson suddenly became the new hotness in his second year. So I am a little skeptical, but he's got an NFL family, right? Obviously, in a Michigan family. He's probably been well schooled on what it takes. So it'll be interesting to see how much he cracks the rotation. But at the same time, last year didn't necessarily have a lot of freshmen that were really like raring to go. It's not like it was a couple of years ago where, 2016, 2017, you got almost the whole freshman class playing in the non-conference. I don't think it's necessarily going to be that anymore because I think that they've gotten enough upperclassmen that are there and available and capable. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We will be back on Thursday. And either I'll start a mailbag, which is unlikely. We'll probably do that next week. Or we'll more likely get into some of the matchup predictor stuff and all of that. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.